Hey everyone, it's the Red Man again. And now that the NFL season's over, I think we can look back and determine that it has been an unmitigated, absolute disaster from beginning to end. Just an unrelenting string of blithering incompetence. That's the thesis statement for this video. And you can see here, I got all my tabs lined up. I'm ready to go. Oh, I'm finna, son. I'm just finna to be on one for a good 15 minutes. And I think we're going to take things, I got them kind of lined up in chronological order, starting with the beginning of the season, when, thanks to the imbeciles nixing the preseason because of the Rona, which is a leap in logic I defy you to explain to me, injuries decimated teams to begin with. See, normally in a football season, you go from not playing football to playing a little bit of football in the preseason to gradually playing some more football to, by the regular season, just playing football full out. This year, they went from not playing football to immediately playing football full out, and as you can see from this headline from Sharp Football Analysis and Matt Manocherian, I am terrible with names. NFL injuries were up 16% over the first half of the 2020 season, and they have the data here, but here's the particular sentence that sums it up perfectly. Well, two sentences. From 2017 to 2019, there was an average of 477 injuries causing players to leave the field during the first half of the year. In 2020, the figure was up to 555, an increase of over 16% over the previous 3-year average, and more than 60 injuries more than any of those years individually. So right off the bat, the NFL's incompetency just destroyed the season with players being injured, apparently due to the lack of a preseason. But this is still, American football. It is a contact sport among contact sports. Injuries happen regardless. I mean, you say 477 injuries even when you have a preseason. That happens. You got to learn to play around it. If that were the only issue, it wouldn't be a big issue. The issues kept piling up. Throughout the regular season, the NFL kept ruining things over their asinine, hypersensitive, and arcane coronavirus policies, and their wildly inconsistent enforcement and punishment regarding those policies. It started when the Tennessee Titans had a whole rash of positive tests, and their game against the Steelers, I believe in Week 3, was postponed, rescheduled for Week 7, costing the Steelers a bye week at any point during the season. It may have done them any good. And this was partly because the Titans players just didn't know what they did was they just went to work out as a team, and apparently that was against the rules because, they all sit on the sidelines as a team, practice as a team. God forbid they lift weights as a team, right? Anyway, due to the Titans having a bunch of positive tests for a cold they probably didn't have any symptoms of among like the 20 positive tests, they fucked up the Steelers' entire schedule. The Titans, important to note here, they were fined the Titans were fined $350,000 for that. Remember that. You will need it later. They were fined $350,000 due to some confusion about the rules. Those rules were then clarified, and later in the season, the Baltimore Ravens, due to a rash of positive tests due to people the tests are positive regardless. It's the middle of winter. People, respiratory viruses go around no matter what you're going to do. But they had some minor violation of these idiotic policies, and thereafter had a whole rash of positive tests that caused their game against the Steelers to be rescheduled from Thursday, Thanksgiving, to Wednesday of the following week. And keep in mind, they rescheduled the game for 6 days, further fucking up the Steelers' whole season just for the Ravens. The Steelers had to spend half a week practicing, not knowing when they were actually going to play the game, and then had to turn around and play the Redskins in like 5 days, due to the Ravens, according to the league's own logic, screwing the pooch. And the Ravens, for this absolute disaster, even after the rules had been explained, after the Titans were fined $250,000, $100,000 less than the Titans were, because the Baltimore Ravens are clearly Goodell's pet franchise with a hot young golden boy quarterback. And we're going to see even more wild favoritism and anti-favoritism in the enforcement of the league's idiotic coronavirus policies. For instance, the Raiders were docked a draft pick for coronavirus violations that didn't affect the league schedule one fucking whit. They did not have to rearrange games or anything because John Gruden didn't properly wear a face mask for 30 seconds. Yet they were still fined $500,000, as you can see here, and I believe they lost their sixth round draft pick, as you can see here. Yet the Ravens, for a far greater catastrophe induced, get half of a fine and no draft picks, just because Roger Goodell doesn't care for the Raiders, apparently. The Saints were likewise screwed over. They were docked a 7th round draft pick and fined $500,000 for maskless celebrations that, once again, did not result in the league having to alter the schedule around them. How is the NFL going to say they have any competitive legitimacy when they're clearly favoring one team over the other in their enforcement in all their rules? The fundamental necessity of sports for them to be taken seriously is a level playing field. Like, both teams have to have the rules enforced against them evenly and consistently. Both teams, both competitors, everybody in the sport has to be treated the same way by the sport's rules and the league's rules, or else it's just an entirely exhibitional performance art akin to the WWE. Although, we'll see by the end of this, I would not even compare the NFL to the WWE. That would be an insult to the WWE. And I just saw this today, actually looking up links for this video. Apparently the Saints are again facing discipline for violating the NFL's Rona protocols, per a report, due to Alvin Kamara testing positive in Week 17, and not, he may have... They have a surveillance video of an interaction that may have contributed to running back Alvin Kamara's positive test in December. He just missed the game. The Saints still won by 24, as you can see here. It basically amounted to absolutely nothing, but because the Saints, if you remember, the Saints paid players to play defense. Let me try that again. The New Orleans Saints paid professional football players to play defense over a decade ago, and Roger Goodell still has a hair across his ass about it because he is a piece of shit. Just a wildly dishonest, megalomaniacal piece of shit. Roger Goodell is off. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be the worst commissioner in American sports when you have ass clowns like Adam Silver and eunuchs like Rob Manfred? That is the depths of malignant incompetency that fat Roger Goodell manages every fucking year. This year in particular. As I said in the beginning, in the 2020 season was a massive shit show. And we'll get to the conclusion when we get there. I'll really put a bow on this. But right now, just know that Roger Goodell is finding any excuse to try to drum the Saints out of the entire league over nothing, while the Ravens can alter the entire fucking schedule and get a slap on the wrist. Why, he made the Broncos play without a quarterback. The Ravens, their quarterback tested positive, and they got the game pushed back 6 days. The Broncos had one quarterback test positive, three other quarterbacks on the roster were held out because they were standing near him at some point prior to that. And they had to call up, I should have had an actual link open here, but they had to call up a wide receiver on the practice squad to play quarterback for a game because the league wouldn't actually, change the schedule for them. But they'd totally do it for the Ravens. Again, it's impossible to have any legitimacy to the league, to the wins and losses, to the entire sport, with such blatant favoritism and wildly inconsistent application of rules. But we haven't even gotten to the pinnacle of that yet. So, after the regular season was absolutely torn apart by the league's incompetent handling of coronavirus protocols and violations and this and that and the other thing, the playoffs had an entirely different disaster. The officiating throughout was so bad, even mainstream sports journalists who I tend to hold in lower regard than most forms of fungus, have been taking a fat dookie all over the NFL for this. You can find this article on ESPN. You see the title here. I'm sure you can Google it. Hopefully I'll remember to link it in the description of the video. But they've basically run down all the different calls, questionable and otherwise, that the referees have made throughout the playoffs. And there are some fucking doozies here that they boggle the mind. They defy understanding how something could happen like this. Here's the top item right here. NFL replay reverses a Josh Allen sack. We'll skip right to the analysis. Well, first of all, what they did was they reviewed and overturned a call. And in the analysis, quote, "There is one major problem here. The play does not appear to be reviewable. A major and inexcusable mistake in a situation that has no time limits to ensure the right call is made. The NFL's replay casebook lists this specific example when a quarterback is ruled to have stepped out of bounds before releasing the ball. On this type of play," the conclusion reads, "when a player is ruled out of bounds, replay cannot make it a pass, forwards or backwards." The NFL's centralized replay center is led by Senior Vice President of Officiating, Al Riveron, and Vice President of Replay, Russell Yerk. The matter of 5 yards wasn't game-changing, but it's incredibly concerning to think that the league's replay system could get confused on exactly what is reviewable and what isn't. No kidding, the entire officiating structure of the NFL apparently doesn't even know their own rule book. They reviewed and overturned a play that is specifically not reviewable. There are generally two schools of thought on nobody ever defends the NFL referees. Some will say it's just the absolute dregs, the dirt worst nadir of human incompetence ever witnessed in recorded history. Others say the league is clearly tilting games one way or the other. I happen to hold the latter view just because it's more fun to think of it as some overt calculated malice, and it is so much more depressing to think that an organization of human beings could be this fucking incompetent without holding elected office. But this right here signals to me it's staggering incompetence, because, this didn't have a massive impact on the game, as they say. It's just a wild fucking blunder for absolutely no reason. Although, really, they could be tilting games and be wildly incompetent even when they're not trying to be malicious. They run down several calls in the Bucs-Packers game. I'm not going to go through them here. You can watch my video breaking down that disaster. That absolute spectacle of blithering incompetence. Just wild dishonesty in officiating. I'm still going with the Packers. The more baffling call happens. We got one way down here. Washington punt and declare a touchback. And of course this goes for Tom Brady's team. This goes to show this is evidence that the league is in fact tilting games primarily for Brady. If it were just incompetence, there would be instances of Brady getting screwed out of meaningful games by this. I can't think of a single instance. I want to see it. Let somebody find me an instance of Tom Brady's team being cost a game by blatantly bad officiating. And not just a bad call when they're already up or down 30. I want a meaningful game being ruined for a Brady's team, like a playoff game or at least a game that alters their playoff seeding. I want them to have been in a position to win it and then be screwed out of it by the referees. Find me one fucking instance. I dare ya. I'll admit I was wrong, but you gotta do it. We'll break down this call right here. What happened? The Buccaneers were awarded a touchback after Washington's Troy Apke picked up a Washington punt near the 7-yard line and, presumably believing it had been touched by a Buccaneers player, ran it into the end zone. How it was resolved. The play remained a touchback. Now, before I get to the analysis, I should say that basically 85% of people watching know right off the bat that when the punting team touches the ball, it's just dead, unless the receiving team has previously touched it. The wives and girlfriends of football fans who only half pay attention to games and just, cheer for the team with the coolest jerseys know this rule. It's a simple, wildly obvious, Most punts are resolved, or not most, but a lot of punts are resolved this way, trying to, down the ball behind the 20-yard line to give the other team the entire field to manufacture a drive. So this rule comes up all the time. The overwhelmingly vast majority of fans understand it, on an almost instinctual level. Yet somehow, these dense motherfuckers managed to blow the call. Analysis. The ball should have been marked where Apke first gained possession, and not a touchback. By rule, the kick that goes past the line of scrimmage is dead as soon as a member of the kicking team downs it. The ball can't be advanced. There are many judgment calls over the course of a game that can be debated. This was a matter of rule application. Washington should have been able to pin the Buccaneers deeper than it did. And it's not a highly impactful call for the game. Regardless of what they called, it was going to be 1st and 10 with the Buccaneers having possession of the ball. The only difference was they had it on the 20-yard line instead of their own 7. But, like I say, there's no judgment, like the article here says. It's not a judgment call. It's not a bang-bang play or anything. It is just a bare-bottom referee school 101 level rule application that playoff referees, all fucking 12 of them or however many are on the field for one game, all of them got it wrong. Absolutely inexcusable. How can you take the NFL seriously after shit like this? And we'll see. People have stopped taking the NFL seriously. We'll get to it. Don't worry, we'll get to it. Now, the cherry on the shit sundae of incompetence throughout the playoffs was the Super Bowl. This was an absolute disaster of officiating, like the rest of the playoffs. And even mainstream sports journalists are just pointing it out. People who normally just suck the butt of whatever league, they want to keep their cushy job, their access to league sources and all that. Normally, these are the last type of people who would call this shit out, but it's so blatant, even they're doing it. Per Yahoo Sports' Doug Farrar, Chiefs have a serious officiating problem in Super Bowl LV. What's that, 55? Super Bowl 55. In the article, per Pro Football Reference, the Chiefs were called for defensive pass interference and defensive holding 5 times in the first half of the Super Bowl. The most DPI and defensive holding calls they had in the full game at any other point in 2020 was 3. And listen, I don't even care if all of these calls were legit. The rest of this article seems to suggest that they weren't. But even if these were honestly good calls for defensive pass interference and defensive holding, you can forgive the Chiefs for thinking that you could just rip a receiver's whole jersey off if they witnessed the NFC Championship game just 2 weeks ago. Again, you've got to have any legitimacy as a league and as a sport. You have to have a somewhat consistent application of the rules. In one game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played where it was basically completely legal to hold the living shit out of every receiver. The refs just weren't calling anything until it was time to call a penalty to give Tom Brady the game. Really, I'm not going to go deep into it. Just go back and watch the video I already made about the NFC Championship game between the Packers and the Buccaneers, and you will get the understanding of what an absolute disgrace that was. But after the NFC Championship game, where you could just grab a hold of anything, apparently in the Super Bowl, the very next game the Buccaneers play, any tiny little bit of contact is now a penalty and a fresh set of downs for the offense, especially if that fresh set of downs goes to Tom Brady. It's impossible to expect people to be able to play a sport when on a match-to-match basis, from one contest to the next, they have no idea what the rules are actually going to be. You may as well be playing Calvin ball. If anyone remembers the Calvin and Hobbes comics, Zoomers, you probably don't know. Anybody over the age of 30, you know. They just make the rules up as you go. It's a complete shit show. It's fun for a little kid playing with a stuffed tiger, but for a professional football league, it's an absolute disgrace to have such wildly inconsistent officiating. Rugby doesn't have this problem. Rugby's an actual sport with competent referees. Only American football, a ridiculous micromanaged bureaucrat-plagued farce of a sport, just a pantomime, an insult to the concept of sport. I call these videos Sport Matters, not because it deals with matters of sport, but because the concept of sport matters in it is a cornerstone to the human species. This sort of competition makes us all better. This ability to go home and watch a game after work just makes life more enjoyable. And these stupid motherfuckers right here, these incompetent piss bags, ruin that. And it makes me absolutely fucking livid, as you may have been able to guess by my ranting and raving about it. I need to bring it in, rein it in a little bit, find my center, and get through this without suffering a stroke. Where were we here? Well, you have this paragraph just showing that they were called in the first half 2 times more than they had been in any other full game through the entire season. It kind of beggars belief to think that the Kansas City Chiefs all of a sudden started actually committing a whole bunch of penalties just in the first half of the Super Bowl. The much more likely explanation is that the referees were flagging absolutely anything specifically to put over Tom Brady. They even have a look at this. We'll go back to the start of this video. This was called pass interference. Little hand, a spectacular dive, and a ball that was overthrown to the point that he wasn't going to be able to catch it anyway. This was the chippiest bit of contact, followed by a massive flop on an uncatchable ball. They basically just gave the Buccaneers the whole field and a fresh set of downs. And maybe if you're a Tom Brady nut hugger, Tampa Bay mark, or some other sort of defender of this obvious dumbassitude, just desperately trying to cope with the reality that the league is a farce and the Super Bowl is, it basically has all the competitive legitimacy of the WWE Intercontinental Championship. You might be saying, oh, well, that's technically pass interference. Terry McAuley, a former NFL official and NBC rules analyst, Terry McAuley, says you would be wrong. Quote, can these be called? Sure. Should they? As former NFL official and NBC rules analysis Terry McAuley points out, not by the letter of the law as it's been held all season long. In a tweet specifically from him, quote, neither defensive hold called on Kansas City comes close to the standard we saw the entire season for that call all season. Redundant man is redundant, and certainly not what we saw in Tampa Bay versus Green Bay. No kidding, Terry. Once again, if you need any explanation on that, just go watch my video on it. I break it down. You might not be able to watch it on mobile because the knob jockeys at the NFL hit me with a copyright strike for using clips of the game. The video's still up. Well, not a copyright strike, a copyright claim. Even though it's just clearly a matter of fair use. So I think it's still restricted on mobile. But if you're on a computer, look it up. And we can see just on this ESPN breakdown right here, penalties for the Chiefs, 11 for 120 yards. Buccaneers, 4 for 39 yards. It seems a little unlikely that this was a legitimate referee or refereeing job. It seems much more likely that they were specifically trying to put Tom Brady over by making it impossible for the Kansas City Chiefs to play football. In fact, I got no actual visual evidence of this, but I looked on my phone at halftime. At halftime, the Buccaneers had 1 penalty for 5 yards. The Chiefs had 8 for 95 yards. On calls, you see how soft the calls were right here. That's how the Chiefs got 8 penalties for 95 yards in the first half. Absolutely disgraceful. And it's largely because of this that we reach the cherry atop this shit Sunday. Bucs Rata Chiefs earns worst Super Bowl rating since 1969. League viewership is dying a death, partly because of the spectacular incompetence of league administration and officiating, and I think partly because you can't just sit down and watch a football game without getting a whole bunch of woke SJW left-wing progressivist lecturing. People, when they get home from work, or I guess it's probably Sunday, they're probably not working, but they wake up, they just want to watch a football game and relax. Like, I turn on a football game to see 2 groups of men do unspeakable violence to each other over who gets to hold the ball. I do not want to be lectured by a bunch of college dropouts on race relations that they themselves have set back by about 40 years with this bullshit. And people just lose interest. They roll their eyes and change the channel or go outside and do something else. They don't want to sit here if you watch the Super Bowl, the commercials were all just that sort of cancer, just obvious diversity casting throughout every commercial, everyone talking about how we've got to do, how we're here for you, this inspirational in these trying times, miserable, tedious shit. Nobody wants to be reminded of these trying times when they're watching the Super Bowl. They want to see like some funny cartoon of an animal, some Super Bowl commercial that entertains them. That's half of the well, not half, but that's a serious portion of the draw. And that's not specifically the NFL's fault that all the commercials were shit, but it doesn't help. Let's get into this article. As I said, the headline, Bucks Rata Chiefs earns worst Super Bowl ratings since 1969. Even the Washington Post, this absolute shill rag, is shitting all over the NFL for this. Quote, there was a relatively small crowd in the stands for Sunday's Super Bowl. Naturally, due to the coronavirus, attendance was, way down just so they didn't have to pack the stadium full. But you'd think that would mean tens of thousands more people not in the stadium, means tens of thousands more people at home watching on TV, so the TV viewership would go up. Guess not. Because, as the article says, in terms of those watching on TV, it wasn't much better. Viewership figures for Super Bowl 55 were lower than for any game, it means Super Bowl, not any NFL game, but lower for any Super Bowl since 2006, and one important metric showed the lowest number since 1969. I'm not going to admit how old I am, but my dad would have been, about 13 when this was played. My dad, who's been retired for, 2 decades now nearly, was 13 when this was played. That's how bad it is. This is the worst Super Bowl rating in 2.5 generations. Spectacular. One important metric showed the lowest number since 1969, when Joe Namath's New York Jets upset the Baltimore Colts in Super Bowl III. Did I just call them the Courts? The Take two. When Joe Namath's New York Jets upset the Baltimore... this was so long ago the New York Jets were actually good. That's how long ago it was. That's how bad the ratings were for this Super Bowl. Well, skip ahead just a little bit. While the Super Bowl continued to garner numbers that dwarf all other television programming, Sunday's installment, in which the Bucks throttled the Chiefs 31-9, continued a downward trend. Indeed, last year was back up, what was the Super Bowl last year? Oh, it was the Chiefs and the 49ers. That was back up over 100 million. But the year before that, when the Patriots played the Rams, viewership also died a death. And you may remember that as the year where the New Orleans Saints were absolutely screwed out of the NFC Championship due to refereeing so bad the NFL actually came out and admitted they made the wrong call several times. And in fact, the Chiefs were screwed out of going to the Super Bowl that year by terrible refereeing when they were playing, of course, Tom Brady and the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. And once again, after that sort of garbage, after you ruin the legitimacy of both conference championship games, lots of people just don't want to watch the Super Bowl, and viewership died a death. Again, this year, after the NFC Championship game was a complete farce of officiating, the viewership took another nosedive. In an unusual move, Nielsen delayed unveiling its ratings until Tuesday, prompting speculation that the news wasn't good for the NFL or its advertising partners. And this is part of the reason I'm waiting to do this, record this video on Tuesday night, because I wanted to wait for the ratings. I knew they were going to be just the dripping shits, and I wanted to revel in it. I hate this league. I hate Roger Goodell. I used to be a fan. I would love for this league to be good, but as just terrible as it is, as much of a pathetic joke of itself as it is, I want nothing but ruin for this garbage-ass league. Maybe if it gets bad enough, they'll get rid of their fucking worthless commissioner and replace him with somebody kind of competent. The market measurement company eventually announced Super Bowl 55 drew an average TV audience of about 92 million viewers. The game also garnered a 38.2 U.S. household rating and was viewed in an average of 46.2 million homes. CBS, which broadcast the game, said Tuesday the game drew 96.4 million viewers across a variety of platforms, that's adding streaming services here. CBS said its digital audience was 5.7 million, the most to live stream any NFL game, representing a 65% increase over last year's Super Bowl. Here's the paragraph that really puts in light what a disaster this fucking was. The network later clarified that its audience for the traditional broadcast was 91.6 million. Compared with Nielsen figures for every Super Bowl telecast, this year saw a 9.6% decrease from the 101.3 million who watched the game in 2020, and a 19.9% drop from the record audience of 114.4 million in 2015, back when this league had the faintest semblance of credibility. And the article just continues to pile on, as you can see down here. The 38.2 household rating posted by Super Bowl 55 was the lowest since the 36.0 mark of Super Bowl III, famous for naming this guarantee of victory for the upstart AFL. 3 years, the Dallas Cowboys win over the Miami Dolphins earned a 44.2 rating, and since then the number has never dipped below 40, apart from 1990 when the San Francisco 49ers rout of the Denver Broncos drew a 39.0, which was still better than 38.2 of this colossal catastrophe. Absolute clusterfuck of a season and a Super Bowl. Last year's Super Bowl, in which the Chiefs beat the 49ers, got a rating of 41.6. Skip ahead just a little bit. The last time, per Nielsen, the Super Bowl attracted fewer than 91.6 million viewers was in 2006, when 90.7 million watched the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Seahawks in a relatively low-scoring contest that featured, honestly, I remember that Super Bowl. Neither team played well. It was an ugly and tedious game. Starting in 2010, viewership topped 100 million for 9 years straight. It dipped to 98.5 million in 2019 when Brady's Patriots nipped the Los Angeles Rams 13-3 in the worst Super Bowl ever witnessed by the league, after the most absolutely obvious screw job of two separate teams in the conference championship games ever witnessed in sport. And I feel that nothing so far has been mentioned about this, but I feel the need to point out that the Super Bowl, the championship match for the NFL, was a number 5 seed team hosting a home game against the defending champion top seed in the league. That is why I say even the WWE has more legitimacy than the NFL, because even the WWE wouldn't book something that fucking stupid. How are you going to have a wild card team host the championship game against the best team in the NFL and still take yourself seriously as a league? And because of the coronavirus, I remember reading that the Chiefs weren't allowed to travel to Tampa Bay until like 3 days before the game. Normally with the Super Bowl, both teams go to wherever it is a week ahead of time, have media day, and spend a week practicing. The Kansas City Chiefs basically had to play a true road game after, I believe they were 15-1 in the regular season. What an absolute farce. How do you take this shit seriously? And this article also doesn't mention, of course, because it's the Washington Post, all the SJW bullshit that was all over the NFL's marketing, just constantly. The commercials, the lead-in, or the intros, the outros, the announcers, this, that, and the other thing, the players bellyaching on Twitter, in interviews, etc. All this lecturing on race relations that just causes people to tune out. And not just the Super Bowl. Ratings for the NFL were down all season because nobody wants to suffer through that shit just to see a fucking football game. We'll go you can play a video game and have fun without the lecture from a collegiate C student who left after his junior year. I gotta wrap this up. This is taking a toll on my blood pressure. I gotta find something to make a video of other than sports. This is taking years off my life, this sort of shit. As I've laid out in this video, all these tabs, this tremendous pileup, this season for the NFL was an unmitigated disaster from start to finish. About the only thing that went right that they can say was that they actually managed to get this season completed and a Super Bowl played. Even if it is basically a fucking Cracker Jack box ring, that means absolutely nothing due to the NFL destroying their own regular season with coronavirus bullshit and then their own playoffs with consistently appallingly bad officiating. Nobody with a functioning frontal cortex could take this shit seriously. This goes beyond the SJW shit hurting the ratings is a more superficial issue. This league is fundamentally broken and will continue to be until the officiating mess and the administration is sorted out so we can, have consistent rules, consistent application of the rules, not blatant favoritism from one franchise to another by the league's office, and not just blisteringly incompetent officiating that with wildly different standards for what does and what does not constitute a penalty on a week-to-week basis. No other sport, not even the NBA, which is also fucking fixed, but they at least manage, no other sport has such a wild inconsistency in its officiating. Even the NBA, like from game to game, the rules are generally the same. If you put a hand on somebody and they cry, it's a foul because it's basically European soccer at this point. But you can go into the game knowing that, you can prepare for that. In the NFL, you have teams show up to every game not having a single clue what the rules are going to be that day. That is inexcusable, and until the NFL fixes it, it will continue to be an absolute joke that nobody with any critical thinking capacity whatsoever could possibly take seriously. And like I say, I want to like football. I used to love football. The NFL and even college has fucking ruined it with this micromanaging, inconsistent officiating. It's just tedious to watch a game. There's rugby I can watch. There's hockey I can watch. Christ, there's All Elite Wrestling. It pisses me off so much. I would rather watch that than an NFL game at this point. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I'm going hoarse, I've ranted so fucking much. Y'all have a good one. Like, comment, if you think, if you're a Tom Brady fan, just let loose in the comments. Let me have it. I want to get in an argument on the internet, son. Blow me up in the comments. Subscribe if you want to hear more of me ranting and raving. And I'll see y'all next time. Until then, just take care and try to find something you can enjoy, if not the NFL. See ya.